Papa, please don't leave me, not tonight.
The marriage is over.
Those were the last words Adanna Okafor sobbed into her dying father's chest as thunder rolled across Lagos Island like drums announcing tragedy. But she couldn't believe her eyes when barely an hour after her father took his final breath, her husband Segun was standing at the foot of the hospital bed, divorce envelope in hand, his mistress Vanessa clinging to his arm in a red bodycon dress, both of them smiling like they'd already won the lottery. Adanna stood there, 6 months pregnant with a baby that would never meet its grandfather, clutching her father's still warm hand, watching through tears as her husband prepared to marry his mistress, while her dad's body was still in the room, while his final breath was still hanging in the air like unfinished prayer. But what shattered Adanna's heart into pieces so small she could barely breathe wasn't just watching her husband betray her at her father's deathbed. It was what she didn't know yet. What Segun didn't know. What Vanessa, in her designer dress and glossy smile, couldn't possibly imagine. Because Chief Obiora Okafor, the humble schoolteacher who'd lived in a simple bungalow and survived on pension money, who'd worn the same faded shirts for years and eaten simple meals, wasn't just a retired teacher. He was the secret owner of Okafor Global Holdings, Nigeria's most powerful private wealth empire, worth 1.7 trillion naira, who'd sacrificed visibility and status to teach his daughter that character matters more than cash, that love is worth more than luxury, that a good heart is the only treasure that truly counts. And in exactly 1 hour and 37 minutes, when the bodyguard stepped forward and the lawyer opened that leather-bound will with gold embossing, when Vanessa read the words, Trillionaire Estate, and Segun saw properties across Abuja, Lagos Island, Ikoyi mansions, oil shares, and offshore accounts all signed into Adanna's name with a clause specifically barring him from receiving even 1 naira. Vanessa would let out a scream so raw, so full of horror and realization, that it would echo through the hospital corridors like a wounded animal. Segun, you fool. You divorced a trillionaire. You left a trillionaire for me. What have we done? Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Stories like this matter, because they show that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who betray us when we're most vulnerable, and that a father's love can protect his daughter even from beyond the grave. Tell me in the comments. If you were Adanna, could you forgive a husband who divorced you at your father's deathbed? And where are you watching from? Lagos, London, New York, or somewhere else? The fluorescent lights of Lagos Island Specialist Hospital flickered as thunder cracked across the darkening sky, rain beginning to pelt the windows in violent sheets. Adanna's fingers trembled around her father's weathered hand, feeling the pulse grow weaker with each labored breath. Chief Obiora's chest rose and fell in shallow movements, his once strong frame now reduced to fragile bones beneath thin hospital sheets. "Papa, please," Adanna whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Don't leave me." Behind her, she heard the sharp click of expensive heels against linoleum. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The sound of Segun's impatience had become as familiar as her own heartbeat over these past miserable months. "Are we really going to do this all night?" Segun's voice cut through the humid air, cold and dismissive. The man lived his life. Let him go. Adanna's shoulders tensed, but she refused to look back. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Not here. Not now, as her father lay dying. "Baby, my feet are killing me," came another voice, higher, younger, deliberately provocative. "Vanessa." The woman lounged against the doorframe in a red bodycon dress that seemed obscene in this sacred moment, one manicured hand resting possessively on Segun's arm. "Can we please just get this over with?" Chief Obiora's fingers tightened weakly around Adanna's hand. His eyes fluttered open, cloudy but focused entirely on his daughter's face. With tremendous effort, he pulled her closer. "Adanna," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "They do not know who you are." "Papa, save your strength." Listen to me. His grip strengthened impossibly. They do not know who I am. All their wealth combined. He paused, gasping for air. Cannot measure what you carry. What do you mean? Adanna leaned closer, desperate to catch every word. But Chief Obiora's eyes had already begun to glaze over, his final breath escaping in a long, rattling sigh. The heart monitor's steady beep transformed into a single, endless tone.
Papa, no.
Adanna collapsed across his chest, her sobs tearing from somewhere deep and primal. The sound of tearing paper cut through her grief. She looked up through blurred vision to see Segun standing over the bed, dropping a manila envelope onto her father's still warm body. Divorce papers spilled across the white sheets. Sign them, Segun said flatly, already turning toward the door where Vanessa waited with a satisfied smile. We're getting married this weekend, and I'm not waiting any longer. The door swung shut behind them, leaving Adanna alone with her father's body and the wreckage of everything she'd once called her life. But Chief Obiora's final words echoed in the silence. They do not know who you are. Adanna stared blankly at the divorce envelope lying beside her father's still hand, her soul split wide open, her mind unable to process the magnitude of cruelty unfolding in real time. Her baby kicked inside her belly, violent and insistent, as if the child could sense the danger surrounding them both, as if even in the womb she knew something terrible was happening to her mother. Vanessa stepped closer, her red heels clicking against the hospital floor like a countdown clock. She tapped her perfectly manicured nails against Segun's arm and let out another wicked giggle that made Adanna's stomach turn. Darling, we really need you to hurry with those papers, Vanessa said, her voice sickeningly sweet, dripping with false politeness. Our wedding venue closes bookings by Sunday, and we've already put down a deposit. You understand, don't you? A nurse standing near the doorway gasped so loud it cut through the room like a slap. Another nurse, an older woman with kind eyes, covered her mouth with both hands, her expression twisted in horror and disgust. Even the hospital security guard who had been standing silently in the hallway stepped inside, his face dark with barely contained anger at what he was witnessing. Adanna's voice came out broken, barely more than a whisper, her throat raw from crying. Segun, she said, looking up at the man she had married, the man whose child she carried, the man who once promised to love her in sickness and health, for better or worse. My father just died in front of me. His body is still warm. And you came here to marry another woman already? Segun shifted his weight, uncomfortable under the stares of the hospital staff, but his jaw remained tight, his eyes cold. Adanna, don't be dramatic. This has been coming for a long time. You know we haven't been happy. Happy? Adanna's voice cracked. My father was dying, Segun. I was at his bedside every night while you were. She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say the words out loud because saying them would make them too real, too final. Vanessa shrugged, a careless gesture that seemed rehearsed, like she'd been waiting months to deliver this line. She tilted her head, her glossy lips curving into a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. You were always beneath him, darling, she said, her voice light and casual as if she were commenting on the weather. He's simply upgraded. The words hung in the air like poison. The older nurse made a sound of pure disgust and turned away, unable to watch anymore. The security guard's hands curled into fists at his sides. Even the younger nurse who had been adjusting Chief Obiora's for just minutes before his death looked like she wanted to physically remove Vanessa from the room. Adanna felt something break inside her chest, something that had nothing to do with her father's death and everything to do with the realization that the man she had loved, the man she had trusted, had never seen her as an equal. He had always been looking for someone better, someone shinier, someone more successful. And now that her father was gone, now that she had no one left to protect her, Segun felt free to discard her like she'd never mattered at all. Segun cleared his throat, straightening his expensive suit jacket, the one Vanessa had probably bought him. "Look, Adanna, your father's illness and all of this." He gestured vaguely at the hospital room, at the grief, at her pregnant belly. "It's been holding me hostage for months. I have a life to live, Vanessa, and I have plans. We can't keep waiting around for you to get over things." "Get over things?" Adanna repeated, her voice hollow. "Segun, my father died 20 minutes ago." 20 minutes? Vanessa sighed dramatically, glancing at her diamond-studded watch as if they were keeping her from something far more important. "Which is exactly why we need to move forward quickly. The longer we wait, the more complicated this gets. Just sign the papers, Adanna. Let him go. Let us both move on with our lives." Adanna's baby kicked again, harder this time, almost painful, and she placed her hand protectively over her belly. Her father's final words echoed in her mind like a prophecy she didn't yet understand. "They do not know who you are. They do not know who I am. All their wealth combined cannot measure what you carry." She looked at Vanessa's designer dress, at Segun's expensive cologne, at their matching arrogance and certainty that they had won, that they were the successful ones, the powerful ones, the ones moving up in the world while Adanna remained behind with nothing but grief and a fatherless child. "They do not know the world you belong to." But Adanna didn't know either. Not yet. The hospital room door opened with a quiet authority that made everyone turn. 3 men entered, moving with the kind of disciplined silence that spoke of military training and absolute professionalism. They were dressed in dark suits, perfectly tailored, with earpieces visible and expressions carved from stone. They weren't hospital security. They were something else entirely, something that didn't belong in this world of antiseptic and grief. The lead bodyguard, a tall man with shoulders like a linebacker and eyes that missed nothing, stepped forward and positioned himself directly between Adanna and Segun. The other 2 flanked him, forming a protective wall that seemed to materialize out of nowhere, creating a barrier between the grieving daughter and the man who had just tried to divorce her beside her father's deathbed. Segun took an instinctive step backward, his arrogance faltering for the first time. Vanessa's eyes widened, her smirk frozen on her face like a mask that suddenly didn't fit right anymore. The lead bodyguard turned toward Adanna and bowed, actually bowed, with a respect so profound it looked almost reverent. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and measured, "it is time." Adanna looked up at him through tears, confusion clouding her grief-stricken face. She had no idea who these men were or why they were treating her like she mattered, like she was someone important instead of the abandoned pregnant woman everyone else in the room saw. The bodyguard reached inside his jacket and withdrew a leather-bound document, thick and official, the kind that held weight beyond its physical presence. He placed it carefully on the side table next to Chief Obiora's still hand, positioning it where everyone in the room could see the title embossed in gold lettering across the front. Trillionaire Estate, last will of Chief Obiora Okafor. The words seemed to glow under the hospital's fluorescent lights. Vanessa's laughter died in her throat, the sound cutting off so abruptly it was like someone had flipped a switch. Her face went pale beneath her expensive makeup, her glossy lips parting in shock. Segun blinked rapidly, his brain clearly struggling to process what his eyes were seeing, what those words actually meant. "What foolishness is this?" Segun barked, his voice cracking slightly, trying to regain control of a situation that was slipping through his fingers like water. "What kind of joke?" "No joke, sir." The lead bodyguard's voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried an authority that made Segun's protests die immediately. "Your ex-father-in-law was the sole owner of Okafor Global Holdings, Nigeria's most powerful private wealth empire. We have been protecting his interests and his family for the past 35 years. Vanessa made a strangled sound, her hand flying to her throat. "What are you talking about?" Her voice had lost all its earlier confidence, all its cruel superiority. Now she just sounded scared. The bodyguard continued, his tone never changing, as if he were reciting facts from a weather report instead of information that was actively destroying two people's assumptions about reality. Chief Obiora Okafor maintained his privacy through careful management and intentional humility. His holdings include oil shares, commercial real estate, diamond mines, offshore accounts, and controlling interests in 17 major corporations across West Africa. Segun's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. The divorce envelope slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the floor like a wounded bird. Estimated value? The bodyguard paused, letting the question hang in the air for just a moment before delivering the answer that would change everything. 1.7 trillion naira. The number landed like a bomb. Vanessa staggered backward, her red heels catching on nothing, her hand reaching out blindly for support that wasn't there. Segun's face went gray, all the color draining from his skin, as if someone had opened a valve and let his arrogance pour out onto the hospital floor. The room fell into a silence, so complete it felt like the world had stopped spinning. No one moved. No one breathed. The only sounds were Adanna's quiet, shocked breathing, and somewhere deep inside her belly, the faint, steady heartbeat of her unborn child, the grandchild Chief Obiora had protected with his last conscious thoughts. Vanessa's voice came out as barely a whisper, broken and disbelieving. "Segun," she said, her eyes never leaving the gold-embossed words on that leather-bound will. "Segun, what have we done?" The lawyer stepped forward from where he'd been standing quietly behind the bodyguards, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and rimless glasses that caught the light. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit and carried himself with the kind of quiet confidence that came from managing billions, not thousands. He nodded respectfully to Adanna before opening the leather-bound will with practiced precision. Every childhood memory began rewiring itself in Adanna's mind as she watched him turn the thick, expensive pages. Her father's old shoes with the worn-out soles that he'd refused to replace even when she'd offered to buy him new ones. His faded shirts that he'd washed by hand every evening and hung to dry on the small balcony of their bungalow. The simple meals of rice and stew, sometimes just gari and soup, that he'd eaten without complaint while telling her stories about integrity and character. Now she understood. He wasn't poor. He was intentional. The lawyer's voice filled the room, formal and clear, reading words her father had carefully chosen before his death. Properties across Abuja, luxury estates scattered throughout Victoria Island and Ikoyi, mansions with addresses that made Vanessa's knees visibly weaken. Oil shares in 3 major Nigerian petroleum companies. A diamond mining operation in Sierra Leone. Offshore accounts in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore. 200 acres of ancestral land in Enugu worth more than entire city blocks. Every single asset, every property, every share, every naira was signed into Adanna's name and Adanna's name alone. Segun's hand gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles turning white as bone. Vanessa had stopped breathing altogether, her chest frozen mid-inhale as the numbers kept climbing, kept multiplying into amounts that didn't even sound real anymore. Then the lawyer reached the clause that made everything final, the paragraph Chief Obiora had added just 3 weeks before his death, after Segun had visited him in this very hospital. The lawyer's voice never wavered as he read the words that would haunt Segun for the rest of his life. "In the event that my daughter Adanna's husband betrays her, abandons her during pregnancy, or divorces her within 12 months of my death, he is hereby permanently and irrevocably banned from receiving, accessing, or benefiting from even 1 naira of this estate. This clause cannot be challenged, cannot be negotiated, and cannot be reversed under any circumstances whatsoever," Vanessa whispered, her voice shaking so badly the words barely formed. "Segun, you divorced a trillionaire." She said it like she was trying to convince herself it was real, like her brain was rejecting the information as impossible. You divorced a trillionaire. Segun turned to look at Adanna, really look at her for the first time in months, and what he saw made him stumble backward. She wasn't the powerless woman he'd discarded anymore. She was sitting beside the body of a man who had loved her enough to build an empire in secret, who had worn old shoes and eaten simple meals so she would grow up understanding that wealth without character was worthless, who had protected her from beyond the grave with legal clauses that were more powerful than any weapon. The lawyer continued, his voice cutting through Segun's spiraling panic. Additionally, Chief Okafor established the following: a monthly stipend of 5 million naira for Adanna's personal expenses, a separate trust fund of 50 million naira for his unborn grandchild's education, and full ownership of Okafor Global Holdings, making Miss Adanna Okafor the youngest female trillionaire in Nigerian history and the sole decision-maker for all corporate matters. Adanna's hand moved to her belly, to the child kicking inside her, to the grandchild her father had loved before he'd ever met. She thought about all the times he'd told her, character is the only currency that. He reached toward her with shaking hands, but the gesture fell short, suspended in the air between them like a plea written in smoke. Adanna rose slowly from her chair. The movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, each stroke erasing not just moisture, but the remnants of the woman who had once begged this man to stay. She leaned down and pressed her lips gently to her father's cool forehead, lingering there as if drawing strength from the man who had orchestrated this final act of love. When she straightened, her spine was steel-wrapped in silk. She turned to face them both, Segun and Vanessa, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Her eyes were no longer wells of sorrow, but mirrors reflecting an unshakable truth. Her voice emerged quiet, steady, carrying the weight of a woman reborn. Thank you for leaving. You freed me. The words hung in the air like a verdict handed down from on high. Segun's knees buckled slightly. He opened his mouth, but nothing came, no excuses, no justifications, no more manipulations. The power that had once flowed from him to her had reversed course entirely, and he stood there drowning in the realization of what he'd lost. Vanessa's composure shattered like glass, striking concrete. Her face twisted, rage replacing her calculated smugness. You fool! She shrieked, lunging at Segun with the fury of someone watching their carefully laid plans disintegrate. Her perfectly manicured fingers clawed at his collar, yanking him toward her. You ruined us. You destroyed everything. She struck him across the face once, twice, 3 times, each slap echoing through the sterile hospital room like punctuation marks on the end of their scheme. Her designer purse tumbled from her shoulder, spilling its contents across the polished floor. Lipstick, credit cards, the detritus of a life built on deception. The bodyguards moved in swiftly, professional and emotionless. They separated Vanessa from Segun with practiced efficiency, each taking an arm as they guided the pair toward the door. Vanessa thrashed and screamed, her voice growing shrill and desperate. Segun stumbled between them, a broken marionette with severed strings. Adanna didn't watch them go. She simply stood at the foot of her father's bed, shoulders squared, chin lifted, one hand resting gently on the curve of her belly where new life grew. Her voice, when she spoke again, was barely above a whisper, but carried the certainty of prophecy. Papa protected us, even from the grave. The scream started somewhere deep in Vanessa's chest and tore its way out of her throat like something dying. It echoed through the hospital corridor, bouncing off sterile walls and linoleum floors, so raw and full of horror that patients in nearby rooms pressed their call buttons thinking someone was being murdered. You left a trillionaire? Vanessa's voice cracked and splintered, her carefully cultivated composure shattering into a million pieces. You divorced a trillionaire for me. She grabbed Segun's collar with both hands, her manicured nails digging into the expensive fabric, shaking him like she could physically rattle sense back into his skull. "What have you done? What have we done?" Segun's face had gone completely gray, his eyes wild and unfocused like a man who'd just watched his entire future burn down in front of him. He pulled away from Vanessa's grip and lurched toward the hospital room where Adanna still sat beside her father's body, now surrounded by bodyguards and lawyers and a reality he could never touch again. "Adanna." His voice came out desperate, pathetic, nothing like the cold confidence he'd had just minutes before when he'd thrown divorce papers onto her father's deathbed. "Adanna, wait, please. We need to talk about this." Two of the bodyguards moved to block the doorway, their presence as immovable as concrete walls. Segun tried to push past them, his hands shoving uselessly against their shoulders. "Let me through. That's my wife. I need to speak to my wife." "Your ex-wife, sir," the lead bodyguard corrected calmly. "You made that very clear when you presented divorce papers approximately 7 minutes ago. Security has been called to escort you from the premises." No, you don't understand." Segun's voice climbed higher, panic making him sound unhinged. "I made a mistake. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know?" Hospital security arrived then, two large men in uniform who had been briefed by the bodyguards about what had transpired. They took Segun by both arms, professional but firm, and began walking him backward down the corridor. He struggled against them, his expensive shoes squeaking on the polished floor, his voice echoing off every surface. "Adanna, please. Think about our baby. Think about our family." Behind him, Vanessa collapsed against the corridor wall, her legs giving out completely. She slid down until she was sitting on the floor, her red bodycon dress riding up around her thighs in a way that would have horrified her an hour ago when image was everything. Now she didn't even notice. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed, her whole body shaking with the kind of crying that came from realizing you destroyed your entire life in one stupid, greedy decision. Patients who'd come out of their rooms to see what the screaming was about stood in doorways and stared. Nurses clustered in small groups near the nurses' station, whispering behind their hands, their eyes moving between Vanessa's crumpled form and the hospital room where a trillionaire's daughter sat beside her father's body. Visitors pulled out their phones, some recording, others texting furiously to share the gossip that would spread through Lagos like wildfire by morning. An elderly woman in a hospital gown shuffled past Vanessa, looked down at her with a mixture of pity and disgust, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "That's what happens when you celebrate at someone's deathbed. God don't like ugly." Several people murmured in agreement. A young nurse who'd witnessed the whole scene in the hospital room shook her head and said to her colleague, "She was laughing while that poor woman's father died. Laughing. And now look at her." Vanessa's red dress, the one she'd chosen so carefully this morning to symbolize her victory, to announce her conquest of another woman's husband, now looked like exactly what it was, a costume of shame. The bright color that had screamed triumph just minutes ago now made her look like a clown at a funeral, garish and inappropriate and utterly pathetic. Down the hallway, security was still dragging Segun toward the exit, his voice growing fainter but no less desperate. "You don't understand. That was 1.7 trillion naira. Trillion. I walked away from." The automatic doors closed behind him, cutting off his protests mid-sentence. Vanessa lifted her face from her hands, mascara streaming down her cheeks in black rivers, her lipstick smeared across her chin, and whispered to no one in particular, "I thought I won. I thought we won." But inside that hospital room, Adanna sat with her hand on her pregnant belly and her other hand resting on her father's chest, surrounded by people who bowed when they spoke to her, and Vanessa finally understood. She hadn't won anything. She'd just helped Adanna lose everything that didn't matter. The hospital room had finally emptied of everyone except Adanna and the lead bodyguard who stood respectfully by the door, giving her space but remaining close enough to protect her. The lawyer had excused himself after ensuring all the legal documents were properly witnessed and filed. The nurses had quietly removed the medical equipment, their movements gentle and reverent, treating Chief Obiora's body with the dignity befitting a man whose true worth had only just been revealed. Adanna sat in the chair she'd occupied for hours, her hand still resting on her father's chest, feeling the absence of his heartbeat like a wound that would never fully heal. Her other hand trembled as she reached for the final envelope the lawyer had left behind, the one marked to be opened by Adanna alone, in her father's distinctive handwriting. The paper felt heavy, expensive, nothing like the notebook paper he'd used to write her encouraging notes throughout her childhood. She broke the wax seal carefully, as if rushing would somehow disrespect his final words to her, and unfolded pages filled with the handwriting she'd know anywhere, slightly slanted to the right, every letter formed with the precision of a teacher who'd spent decades grading papers. My dearest Ada M., my precious daughter, my greatest treasure. It began, and Adanna's vision immediately blurred with fresh tears. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are probably confused, maybe scared, definitely grieving in ways I wish I could spare you from. I am so sorry I am not there to explain this in person, to hold you while you process it, to see your face when you realize who you really are, and who you have always been. Adanna pressed the letter against her chest, closing her eyes, trying to feel him through the paper, through the ink, through the love that poured from every word. You must understand something, my daughter. Wealth without love is poison. I have seen it destroy families, corrupt souls, turn children into monsters fighting over their parents' corpses before they're even cold. This is why I walked away from the Okafor name when I was young, why I chose a simple life, why I let the world think I was just another schoolteacher barely surviving on a pension. She read about his youth, about the family empire he'd been born into, about the pressure to marry for business alliances instead of love, about the day he'd met her mother at a charity event and known with absolute certainty that he'd rather have love in a small house than loneliness in a mansion. Your mother, my beautiful Chioma, was everything pure in this world. My family said she was beneath us, that marrying her would disgrace the Okafor name. So I made a choice, Ada M. I chose her. I chose love. I chose real life over pretend power. And when she died bringing you into this world, when I held you for the first time in that hospital room not so different from the one where I am leaving you now, I knew I'd made the right choice. Adanna's baby kicked, strong and insistent, and she placed her hand over her belly, creating a connection between 3 generations, her father's words, her own heartbeat, and her daughter's movements. I want you to know that I never stopped managing the family wealth. I just did it quietly through lawyers and offshore accounts, letting it grow while teaching you what actually matters. Every decision I made, every lesson I taught you about character and integrity and kindness was preparing you for this moment. Then came the paragraph that made Adanna sob out loud, the words hitting her like physical blows. 3 weeks ago, Segun visited me in the hospital. He complained about medical bills, about how your pregnancy was bad timing, about the burden of caring for a dying father-in-law. He actually used the word burden, 8 a.m. And I saw it then, clearly, what I'd been suspecting for months. He was going to leave you. He was going to abandon you at your most vulnerable moment because he thought you had nothing, because he thought he could do better.
Adanna remembered that day.
Segun had told her he was too busy with work to visit. He'd lied, and her father had known, had seen through him completely. So I called my lawyers the next morning and restructured everything. I made it impossible for him to touch even 1 naira. I protected you, my daughter, the only way I knew how. And I need you to understand something crucial. Him leaving is not a tragedy. It is a gift. Because now you will know with absolute certainty that when he chose to go, he had no idea what he was walking away from. He left you because he thought you were poor, because he thought you were weak, because he thought he could upgrade to something better. The letter continued, her father's voice clear and strong even through ink and paper. Let him go, Ada M. Let him marry his mistress. Let them build their little life together. Do not seek revenge. Do not try to hurt them back. Simply live. Build something beautiful with this wealth I've left you. Help women who feel powerless and abandoned, because you will understand their pain in ways most wealthy people never will. Feed the forgotten. Shelter the homeless. Educate children whose parents cannot afford school fees. Build hospitals. Fund scholarships. Create opportunities for people who thought they had none. Adanna's tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink slightly, but she kept reading. And when your ex-husband sees what you become, when he watches you on television cutting ribbons at charity events, when he reads about you in newspapers, when his daughter, my granddaughter, inherits an empire he can never touch, I want you to smile. Ada M. Not with cruelty, not with malice, but with genuine peace. Because that is the revenge of queens. We do not destroy our enemies. We simply become so magnificent, so purposeful, so aligned with our true calling that they destroy themselves watching us shine. The final paragraph was short, just 3 sentences that Adanna would carry with her for the rest of her life. You are never alone. You are never poor. You are never powerless. I made sure of that. I love you more than all the trillions in the world. You are my greatest treasure, my perfect daughter, my Ada M. Papa. Adanna kissed the letter, pressed it against her heart, and whispered into the quiet room. Papa, I will honor you. I promise I will honor you. She looked at her father's peaceful face and finally understood what he'd spent her entire life trying to teach her. Money was just a tool. Love was the inheritance that actually mattered. And sometimes, the people who walk away from you are simply making room for the life you were always meant to live. The automatic hospital doors opened with a soft whoosh, and Lagos air hit Adanna's face like rebirth. It was still evening, the harmattan dust settling over the city in layers of copper and gold, but something had shifted in the atmosphere, in the weight of the world pressing against her shoulders. She stood at the threshold for just a moment, her hand resting on her swollen belly, feeling her daughter kick with a kind of strength that promised she would be a fighter, just like her grandfather. Behind her, the lead bodyguard held an umbrella, even though it wasn't raining, creating a barrier between Adanna and the chaos that waited beyond those doors. Because word had already spread somehow, the way shocking news always does in Lagos, traveling through text messages and phone calls and the mysterious network of gossip that moved faster than any internet connection. Reporters had gathered in the parking lot, their cameras already flashing, their voices already shouting questions that blurred together into white noise. Miss Okafor, is it true about the inheritance? Miss Okafor, how much are you worth? Miss Okafor, what will you say to your ex-husband? The bodyguards formed a protective wedge around her, moving with synchronized precision that spoke of years of training. They guided her toward a black Mercedes SUV that gleamed under the parking lot lights, so polished and expensive it looked like it belonged to visiting dignitary, not the daughter of a retired schoolteacher. Except she wasn't that anymore, was she? She was the daughter of Chief Obiora Okafor, owner of Okafor Global Holdings, and the weight of that identity was still settling onto her shoulders like a coat she hadn't learned how to wear yet. As they walked, Adanna caught sight of Segun standing near the hospital entrance, security guards flanking him to make sure he didn't try to come back inside. His face was haggard, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. When he saw her, he lunged forward, but the security guards held him back. "Adanna, please." His voice cracked, all his earlier coldness replaced with raw panic. "We can fix this.
We can work this out.
Think about our baby. Think about our marriage. Adanna stopped walking. The bodyguard stopped with her, waiting, letting her make the choice. She turned to look at her ex-husband, really look at him, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pain, no longing for what they'd had. Just a vast, peaceful emptiness where love used to live. You already ended our marriage, Segun, she said quietly, her voice carrying across the parking lot despite the reporters and the traffic and the city noise surrounding them. You ended it when you brought your mistress to my father's deathbed. You ended it when you threw divorce papers onto his body while it was still warm. You made your choice. Now live with it. She turned away from him, dismissing him as completely as he dismissed her hours earlier, and continued walking toward the Mercedes. Each step felt lighter, freer, like she was shedding weight she hadn't known she was carrying. Vanessa sat crumpled on a concrete barrier near the parking lot exit, her red dress dirty now, her makeup destroyed, her face puffy from crying. She looked up as Adanna passed, her mouth opening as if to say something, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? What apology could undo mocking a woman at her father's deathbed? What explanation could justify celebrating someone else's grief? Adanna didn't stop for her either. She simply walked past, her pregnant belly leading the way like a promise, like hope made visible. The bodyguard opened the Mercedes door, and Adanna slid into leather seats softer than anything she'd ever touched. The interior smelled like new car and expensive cologne and power. The driver, an older man with kind eyes and a respectful nod, adjusted the rearview mirror and asked softly, "Where to, madam?" Adanna looked down at her belly, at the daughter who would grow up knowing her worth from the very beginning, who would never doubt that she was loved beyond measure, who would inherit not just money, but the lessons her grandfather had died to teach them both. "Home," she said, then corrected herself.
No.
"Take me to my father's house. I need to see where he lived, how he lived, now that I know the truth." As the Mercedes pulled away from the hospital, reporters running alongside trying to get one more shot, one more quote, one more piece of the story that would dominate Lagos headlines for weeks, Adanna looked out the tinted window at the city her father had loved. She whispered to her unborn daughter, her hand pressed against the place where tiny feet kicked and pushed, testing the boundaries of the womb that wouldn't contain her much longer. "We are no longer abandoned, my darling girl. We are the Okafors, heirs to more than money, heirs to dignity, to purpose, to love that protects even from beyond the grave. Your grandfather made sure of that, and I will make sure you never forget it." The city lights blurred past, Lagos at night beautiful and chaotic and full of possibility. And Adanna Okafor, 6 months pregnant and freshly orphaned and suddenly wealthy beyond imagination, felt something she hadn't felt in months.
Hope.
If this story moved you, if it reminded you that the people who abandon you often do you the greatest favor, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Tell me in the comments, would you forgive Segun if he came back begging? Or is betrayal at a deathbed the line that can never be uncrossed?